Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Charity Charge Show. My name is Matt, and I'm joined today by Robert Santana, who is the CEO of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Central Orange Coast. Robert, thank you for being on the show today.
Matt, super excited to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, very excited to get into this. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in at Charity Charge. Our mission is to empower yours. So, outside of this podcast and blog series, we do that through equitable access to financial tools and services, such as our credit card and gift card programs. If any of that sounds like it would be helpful to your organization, please do reach out to us. And Robert, I'm very excited to chat with you about your leadership role with this organization. But before getting into that, just curious about your background and kind of what got you into the nonprofit space initially and set you on this path that you're on today.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I think my journey, my leadership journey is like a lot of people that end up in nonprofit. It was not a direct path, right? I wasn't that little kid that said, one day when I grow up, I want to be the leader of a nonprofit. I think we could do much better as a nonprofit sector to really advocate for how much impact a young person can have as a career. But my story starts in the county that I serve as the leader of the Boys and Girls Club for my club. I grew up in Santa Ana and had a great home life. I had two parents that were working parents. I had an older brother that kept me out of trouble and kind of on the right track. I had sports that kind of kept me focused on positive things. And so I didn't know until I was an adult that I grew up in an at-risk neighborhood and that that we were poor. My parents did a great job of raising us and providing those core values. Where I really started to develop, I think, kind of the trajectory of why I'm where I'm at today was probably in high school. My parents told me, we wish we could buy you a car, but we can't afford it." And so I was 15 years old and I went and got a job and I was washing dishes and making pizzas. And I think that experience really started me on the right trajectory that has kind of built my leadership model around work ethic and hustle, right? And so I did that for a couple years, and then I bought my own car, and I started my own business when I was in high school. I started an auto detailing business simply because the owner of the Italian restaurant that I worked at was complaining that he pays $100 to this guy to come once a week and wash his car, and he doesn't even do a good job. And $100 was like $1 million in my mind. And so I said, well, I can do that. And so the next day I went and bought all the equipment I needed and he was my first client. And so by the time I was a senior in high school, I had employees, I had contracts with different office buildings and I was running a business. And that really I think, kind of fueled my entrepreneurial kind of spirit of being able to just go out and build something. The next step was probably not predictable, but I ended up joining the Air Force right after high school and serving as a member of the 15th Security Forces Unit. I was stationed in Hawaii, and my plan was I was going to go into law enforcement as a profession, and I would work for a local police department. And I had an incredible experience in the Air Force. I learned a lot about leadership and integrity and ethic and service to others. And so I earned my degrees in criminal justice while I was in the Air Force. And that led me to my next chapter, which was, all right, I'm going to be a police officer. And I had gone through the recruiting process with LAPD so I can move back home. And I just had this weird moment inside. I listened to that voice of where I'm going, and something just told me that I should work with young people, and that while law enforcement was a path that I was pursuing and I was really good at, I had education. I felt that working with young people gave me the opportunity to invest in someone before they run into law enforcement, right? And so just by chance, I went to the Boys and Girls Club in Santa Ana to go volunteer, and I thought I would be there for 2 weeks. And this is my 20th year at the Boys and Girls Club, and I didn't know it at the time. I've been always very comfortable doing what I felt was right, but this position that I'm in as a CEO of a nonprofit, it blends my background in law enforcement because I know what happens when we don't build community, when we don't, cultivate the good things of our, of society, when we don't kind of intervene at the right time. I have a degree in child development that I earned while I was working at the Boys and Girls Club. So I know the science around what kids need as they're growing up. And, my experience working with young people in the classroom and in the community, really being thoughtful of like, what does the school system do? And then where are the gaps after that? Because the schools can't do everything. And then my last piece was like, I'm an entrepreneur. I was born an entrepreneur. I have this spirit of like creating and developing solutions and really kind of that enterprise mindset. And my role as a CEO blends all those pieces, and I get to be a social entrepreneur in this organization for an organization that I'm just very passionate about and very grateful to be a part of. The kids we serve are the kids. That was my story. All I needed was some guidance and some direction, and then you unlock that potential. And so that's kind of what brought me to this point, and we've grown a lot. We've done a lot of mergers. My first month at the Boys and Girls Club, I think we were serving about 150 kids. This year, we're going to serve about 15,000 kids through a network of sites and partnerships, and the journey continues. How do we continue to challenge the status quo?
Yeah. Wow, that's really incredible. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of that story that, it wasn't planned, but as you kind of summed up your path to this position, it almost seems like that would be a great plan to, gather that experience that you're now bringing to the table here. And it's really wonderful that you yourself were a member of a Boys and Girls Club, and now here you are, um, after a wealth of experience. As a CEO, obviously you're doing wonderful things, leading your particular chapter, but you are also are a consultant for other boys and girls clubs across the U.S. What's that? How did you get involved with on more of the national level? Was it because you were executing some pretty great best practices that were maybe needed in other areas of the U.S., or how did you get involved on a
Yeah.
consultant level?
My personal mission and the mission of our Boys and Girls Club is to be a mentor, right? It's to ensure that every young person has a mentor. I've met a lot of successful people in my life, whether they're police officers or architects or philanthropists. And what I've learned about leadership, really good leadership, is there's no common denominator of like what school they went to or like, how much money their parents made. What I've learned is the common thread between great leaders and just great people is that they have benefited from the generosity of other people, right? So they've had mentors in their life. A lot of the successful CEOs and executives that I know to this day have mentors that they go to for advice, for counsel. And so for me, this is a personal mission. I have benefited from the generosity of other people. I've had people in my life and to this day that invest in me that I can go to for counsel. And so if I believe that this is the mission, right? And I've benefited from that, then I have to feed this as well. I have to be a mentor to other people. And so that's really where this started was, you know, it started organically where people would ask me, "Hey, can I grab lunch with you and pick your brain?" Or I'm thinking about going into the nonprofit sector. Can I get your thoughts on it? I was a part of a business group called Vistage. It's a international CEO peer group program. And so for a few years, it was me and 15 other for-profit CEOs, and we would meet once a month and just process business issues, personal issues, et cetera. And we were a board of advisors to each other. And so organically, that kind of became the launching point of uh, hey Robert, can you come into our company and give us advice on recruitment of a vice president of sales? And my skill set isn't to run a nonprofit; it's to be kind of an out of the box thinker, a creative kind of thinker. And so organically, that kind of grew into people asking for my opinion. And
Mhm.
what has developed over the last few years is I've been asked to join advisory groups, advisory boards, board of directors. And then as I look at the role that I have had, I was 28 years old when my Boys and Girls Club appointed me as the CEO. And, I'm sure at the time I felt like I knew it all, but like in hindsight, I knew very little to what I would actually need to know. And so part of my mission when I work with other CEOs is to make sure that they have a support system like I've had, right? People that you can go to and just really get that support. And we've heard the imposter syndrome a lot. In hindsight, I certainly had that. It's should I should I be here? Do I belong here? Did my board of directors make a mistake by entrusting me to lead this organization? And I feel like there's this balance of like that has kept me really, really focused. Is like proving people right, right? Is my board put a lot of trust in me in at a point that I wasn't really tested, and so I feel an obligation to make sure that I prove them right. And so as I look at next generation CEOs or even CEOs that are, in their spot, some of the CEOs that I coach are in their 7th to 10th year, and they're really looking at like, what do I need to do to recharge or reset and kind of, you know, go to the next level. As I mentioned earlier, this is my 20th year. I think I've been 3 types of CEO in that 20-year period. Those first couple years was new. I was a turnaround CEO, so I was taking over an organization that really needed kind of to shift its trajectory and clean up systems and kind of rebuild. And a turnaround CEO is a very specific skill set, right? It's kind of urgent, urgency around specific things that are not working. It's kind of casting the right direction. But
Yeah, you got to
if
be the
you're
fixer.
yeah, and if you're only a fixer and you fixed it, then your next move is you move on to somewhere else that's broken, or you're gonna end up tinkering too much with the things that you just fixed. So I recognized that I needed to grow into what I'm kind of the phase in now, which is, scalability, really more strategic, in my approach. I'm not so much into the day to day. My responsibility is to build culture, to really look for the big opportunities, to kind of make sure that we're on the right course, strategically. And you can't do that when you're in the tactical turnaround kind of phase of things. And so, the next phase, the second phase was me starting to earn some trust with the community, with my board, and with my staff, with testing new things. And as I'm sure you would agree, change is probably the most difficult thing that people kind of face, right? Whether it's change at home in your personal life or change in your work life, but I recognized pretty early on that change and adaptability is a muscle. And if you develop that muscle, it makes you agile. It allows you to kind of, adjust to things. What we didn't know was that, over the over the last couple of years, things would get disrupted in a way that we never could have really anticipated. And I think the organizations that had developed the skill of adaptability have done the very best. And I don't think change is like done. We should expect constant change in every aspect of our day-to-day life and in our work life. And so the phase that I'm in now is just making sure that we have the right values, culture, that we're bringing in the right people, and I'm building leadership structure in our organization. We can't scale if I'm the bottleneck in every aspect of the business. And so as I think about my role as a mentor and coach to other leaders, it's really making sure that they have a support system and a roadmap for where they can go with their own journey.
When you were, a turnaround CEO, if you could dig into that a little more, what was that experience like, and what surprised you about the driver's seat of an organization that really did need some remedial assistance and turning around of.
Yeah, my initial reaction is to say that it was rough and harder, but the reality is my job gets harder every year anyways. But it's a different environment, right? And I'll tell you, so this was 2005, and I walk into an organization, Boys and Girls Club, that's been around for 50 years. Before I even got there, there's 5 decades of history and success, but also 50 years of like, rust, right? Like I always tell people like the biggest advantage that we have as a Boys and Girls Club is that we've been around for as long as we have. Our biggest disadvantage is that we've been around for as long as we have. So I came in, with this spirit of entrepreneurship, and I looked at it, I was like, let's behave like a 50-year-old startup, right? Let's embrace the things that we have that are working for us, right? So, we have a brand reputation, we have relationships, we have infrastructure, but I had to kind of, loosen up a lot of things that I think were stuck. So, pool tables and ping pong and foosball, those are not what makes a Boys and Girls Club. But for an institution, you hold on to artifacts like that. And part of my disruption was, okay, convince me that these are the things that young kids today are looking for. And if you can't convince me, then we have to, update and re-strategize. And so my early years as a disruptor for a turnaround organization was not just the things that were broken, but it was a model that had worked for 50 years, but I knew to the core of who I was wasn't going to be the future. So the hard part is if you take away something like pool tables. The first thing I did was like, we can't have 10 pool tables in this room, guys. Like, that's just not what we should represent. That's not the gap that exists in our community. We have kids that are hungry. We have families that are struggling. We have, especially at the time in Santa Ana, we have kids that are joining gangs, committing crimes. They're not graduating high school. What is a pool table going to do to solve any of these issues? So I realized pretty early on that one of the roles of a leader is to ask the right questions. And at the time, we were asking the wrong questions. How do we become a better Boys and Girls Club, or how can we improve our after school program? And I started asking what I would consider to be obnoxious questions like, how do we break the cycle of poverty in this community? How do we make sure that every young person has a positive adult role model that is in their life so that whatever's happening in the community and in the environment, we're the constant good, right? How do we make sure that every family has a support system? So if they're hungry, we have access to food. If they're being evicted, we have the ability to connect them to someone. And we were the first Boys and Girls Club in the country to build a clinic at the Boys and Girls Club. So we have a partnership with Children's Hospital of Orange County, CHOC, and literally we have a doctor and nursing staff that are providing healthcare to families who, without that resource, wouldn't have access to healthcare. And so by asking different questions that are bigger than us, it creates different results. But those first couple
Mhm.
years, I would say it was rough because there's resistance, right? It's what I mentioned earlier. Change management is difficult because people sometimes would rather hold on to something that they know doesn't work, but it's what they know. And I saw a lot of that in the
Mhm.
very kind of early days. Any change that I was bringing was in some cases, fear, caused fear and uncertainty.
Mhm.
I think once you get over that, and all of a sudden it's like we didn't die, and not only we didn't die, but we're doing really good things, and there's where that muscle comes in. And so now it's like I can go to my board and say, I kind of have a crazy idea, and I'm not afraid of speaking up about it and sharing that vulnerability. I think early on, I had to be really careful. Like, my gosh, is this too big of an idea? Should we be, doing things that are non-traditional to what we've done? Getting prescription glasses for kids that are not seeing the chalkboard, and bringing in USC Dental School to turn our gym into a clinic so that we can have dentists serve adults and kids that haven't seen the dentist in years. Like,
Mhm.
these things aren't traditional to, or weren't traditional to what a normal club was doing. I'm excited that we're seeing this happen across Boys and Girls Clubs across the country. Not that we take credit for creating that innovation, but we're seeing great things happen like this because organizations that are mission driven are willing to try new things and innovate the way that they're doing.
Absolutely. I think you asking those bigger questions asking those questions are what shapes and refines a mission. You know, maybe a mission that's has the best of intentions, but the needs of the community it serves, have change over time, and innovation, can allow for serving an even greater purpose than providing a place to play pool. While that's all well and good. Absolutely, I think you were asking yourself and challenging the organization at that stage of being the CEO. Yeah, to think bigger, which is pretty fantastic. And you mentioned, after sort of the fear of change, that neophobia is overcome by an organization. It's then a muscle that can be flexed. Yeah, was there a certain point in time, a couple of years in, where you started to feel that overcoming of that fear, and that gained trust from your board, from the community that you had mentioned?
Yeah, there's been a few of those moments. I think the first is that we have to recognize that that fear is normal, right? I think it's a natural defense mechanism that is built in us to sense danger, right? So I think it was first acknowledging like we understand that this is unknown, especially if we're building something new. Let's include people in the process. Let's make sure that they feel informed. And most importantly, let's make sure that people understand the why of this, right? And so, people could take offense to change, and they could say, "What do you? We've been here for 50 years. Who are you, right, to say that it's not good enough?" And I learned pretty quickly to have a different conversation than this is not good enough. And instead, it's like every strategy is designed to get you to a certain point. What got you here won't get you there. And so I respect I'm a very respectful person, especially coming from military service. Like I do have a deep kind of appreciation for the work that's been done before. And so there's a way for us to respect the past. Part of my role as a CEO today is to preserve history, and to respect the past, all those people that have come before me. But my other role is to make sure that I leave this organization in a much better place so that one day when I get to retire, someone else is taking it from there. And so I'll tell you one that sticks out. We started this initiative called College Bound about 10 years ago. And there was a Boys and Girls Club in the LA area, the LA Harbor Boys and Girls Club, that developed this program. And they were gracious enough to kind of share their best practices with us. And I was really good friends with their CEO. He's retired since then. But they developed this concept around how do we get Boys and Girls Clubs to help high school age students get into college? And the whole premise of this is the average high school has like 300 to 400 students assigned as a counselor assigned to the students. So like the average counselor has so many students assigned to them that there's no way that it's like a really good ratio. When you would ask the average high school student, like, when's the last time you met with your high school counselor? They're like, I don't even know who that is. And so that model isn't a very customer friendly kind of environment. So we created our own version of College Bound where it's Boys and Girls Club academic advisors. So they have a bachelor's degree. They're working on their master's and their credential to become a high school counselor. We hire them kind of in that phase while they're finishing their degree, and we assign 40 students to one academic advisor, and they meet once a month at least, if not 4 times a month. And we know if they missed third period. We know how, we have all this data that we collect. So we know if you failed your P test and stuff like that. And so it's a very customer focused, consulting model. So we have a 100% graduation rate with this program. Typically, 98% are going to a 2 or 4 year college, and 2%, depending on the year, go to military service, but 100% are leaving this program with some plan for their future. We have a scholarship program built into this. So this year, we're distributing $1,000 in scholarships directly from the Boys and Girls Club to these students. The majority of these students are first generation. And then we help secure financial aid because a lot of these kids might qualify for financial aid. So on average, we're securing 2.5 to almost $3 million in financial aid every single year. Can you like, and this year we're gonna serve 3,000 high school age students at 20 high schools. So it's become a pretty big initiative. We invest, I think, more into teens and teen service than I think anyone else does in our county, and these are big investments. But it started with an idea, and how are we gonna pay for it, and will they even come? And first year was like 25 was our goal, 25 high school students. We ended up serving about 50, and then, we've been able to seed that program and scale it. We're on track that in 3 years, we're gonna double it. So we're gonna probably serve about 6,000 high school students at over 30 locations in the next couple of years. But the moment that I had that was, a couple years after we launched was we had a parent workshop on a Saturday, right? And it was strictly for parents of these kids so that we can talk to them about, the opportunities that exist and kind of how to collaborate. What we were seeing very, very early on was, we can get a young person a full ride scholarship if they left, out of the area or maybe out of state, but then, the family would say, "You can't leave. We need you to stay home." And, why are you going to college when you can work here? And I had the almost the exact same conversation with my parents. They were like, why do you need to go to college, right?" And so we developed this parent workshop so we can really put the value of the investments that their kids would be making. And I got to tell you, the first couple of years was tough because these are real issues, right? If a family is not able to afford rent and someone is able to go, in the family to go, earn a job, then everyone starts contributing. So these are real issues. And so here's the moment, 2 years in, Saturday morning, like 8 in the morning to like noon, we had over 150 parents show up to this kind of workshop. And I was if you would have said, "Robert, do you think you can get 150 parents to show up on a Saturday for a workshop like this?" Especially at the high school level, because like,
Mhm.
if it's kindergarten or preschool, like you're dropping your kid off, you're giving them their hug, like, you made them breakfast. You're dropping your kid off at high school, and I've heard this from like superintendents of high schools or schools are like, you're lucky if the parents slow down the car when they're dropping off their kids. Like to have that level of involvement was a mission moment for me. And not only were they were like pulling me aside and saying, "Robert, how do you get my son into USC? How do we help get them into this college and that college?" And so that was one of those early moments of like, this is it. This is happening. And then to see these rock star kids that were already rock stars, they just didn't have the pathway. They didn't have that support system. They didn't have those experts that know how to navigate scholarship applications or the FAFSA application. And so that was one of those early moments of like, here's the reason why we've made changes, right? We've replaced the energy that it took for us to introduce ping pong and stuff like that into breaking the cycle of poverty, getting these young people on a pathway for college education, for career, and that will break the cycle of poverty. It will change the trajectory of what's happening in our communities.
Wonderful. One thing I really like that you said was, honoring the past and the work that has been done. Obviously, that creates the foundation, but also there's wisdom to be found in work that's been done before you show up to carry on a mission like that. And no, that pivotal moment where, and I love that you do have like a specific example, like a Saturday morning, 150 parents show up asking you, "How do I get my child into USC?" Like that is that is quite wonderful. Like you said, a mission moment, and so that's a fantastic example of when there's a change in the wind there. And now you've been with the organization for many years now. Looking forward, you mentioned some of the initiatives of the Boys and Girls Clubs. Any other initiatives or, places that you see the organization going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so we did something about 10 years ago where, again, it's that entrepreneurial kind of, spirit kind of popping its head in. But, I started looking at the nonprofit sector kind of around us. And I really love when I see like a startup organization or a new executive that's trying to grow or develop something new. I'm a big believer that we should be supporting each other as a sector. I'm very fortunate that I'm surrounded by a lot of other boys and girls clubs that are doing incredible work. So like anytime that we can share best practices and ideas, we collaborate a lot. We visit each other's locations, and so I learn a lot from just kind of being around like-minded people. But a few years ago, I kind of had this concept of like, what if we started kind of incubating like other nonprofit kind of ideas, right? And so we've developed different concepts internally that has its own brand. Might treat it as if it's a standalone kind of organization. It has a director. And what we've done is like we've streamlined like the business operation. So it doesn't need its own separate finance team and fundraising team and board of directors. And so what started as like, let's innovate some things that might not fit into a traditional Boys and Girls Club model has allowed us to kind of create different initiatives that if you were just to look at it on paper, you would say, "Man, there's 25 staff members assigned to that." It takes $1.5 million to fund that initiative, and it's gonna serve 3,000, high school age students. So, like, college bound, I treat it as if it's its own kinda structure, right? And we streamline it. That's bigger than most nonprofits. I mean, the average nonprofit is, like has a budget of, like, $500,000, and so I what we've been doing is trying to create like the business efficiencies and leadership structure so we can do more things. We've also done some mergers over the years that has allowed us to merge an organization into ours, maintain the brand identity, preserve the history of that organization, but infuse the things that we're missing: leadership structure, quality control, eliminate all the admin business, so that they don't have to go outsource grant writing and hire an accountant, and we could just do more of the program. And so we've done a couple mergers that have led to that. So in addition to College Bound, we're doing a lot of work with workforce development and really preparing young people for career paths that may not really, require a traditional 2 or 4 year college education. So we spent almost a year really looking at the market of Orange County and identifying what industries are expected to grow over the next decade, what jobs can provide a livable wage, given how expensive things are in Orange County, and um, may not require kind of that formal, upfront investment. So we identified specific career paths, careers in trades and construction. I mean, we're Orange County. There's always construction happening, whether it's a new hotel or apartment complex or housing, commercial. So, how do we connect those trades to the Boys and Girls Clubs? How do we create a pipeline for careers, into these specific pathways? Careers in healthcare. There's so many other pathways in it other than being a doctor or a nurse. So how do we raise awareness and create pathways? And the list goes on. So 2 years ago, we merged with a nonprofit that had been focusing on workforce development for 52 years, but they just struggled to build scale, and because they didn't have the resources and the brand of a Boys and Girls Club, they just kept hitting the ceiling. So we merged the organization, we welcomed their board onto our board, we hired the staff, we eliminated like 40% of the budget because it was going into an office suite, outsource, accounting, outsource grant writing, the copy machine rental, the phone system, all that stuff. And in the first year, we doubled the number of clients served. We're connecting young people 16 to 24 years old to their first job. I mentioned about my first job. I think that first job helped set me on the right course. So a first job could really be important for someone. Most college students these days have to have a job while they're managing a course, coursework at a college. So, really has kind of get into that space. But that's another example of how do we build leadership structure and investment into something that's going to change the trajectory for young people. And you know, I heard it a lot when we were doing College Bound in those early years. Like, well, college isn't for everyone, and like it was just one of those things that every time I heard it was kind of like a it was kind of a poke to me, and I don't know, I know why, but it was triggering me. And the reason it was triggering me is like, well, I only hear that in poor neighborhoods. I don't hear that in more affluent communities. Like, I don't hear that as often of like, well, college isn't for everyone. And so I understand that's a factual statement, but in communities where we have, poverty, we have to raise the bar and we have to create more pathways for college because we know that that is one of the most likely opportunities that will break that cycle of poverty. Now, if someone doesn't want to pursue college or that it's not required for the path that they're interested in, we now have this complementary, you know, investment so that we can help young people go one way or the other. But what we can't have is someone graduating high school without a plan and us just kind of hoping that they do well in life. It's just, we that isn't the environment we're in anymore where you can out of high school go into a good paying job without a college degree and be successful and raise a family and buy a home. Like, there has to be some plan. And so we're doing a lot. That's over the next few years, that's probably going to be our biggest investment.
Mhm.
It's an additional, I think we estimate that over the next 3 or 4 years, in addition to our regular budget, it'll probably be about $9 million that we're investing just into growing college bound and workforce development into all the communities that we're serving.
That's wonderful. What a wonderful example of collaboration and pulling resources. Just the amazing work that you were able to accomplish with an organization that was, struggling to scale and essentially pull your resources, merge essentially, and double the clientele and the impact like that. That's very fantastic, and I think that that's hopefully we see more of that in the nonprofit space, the collaboration and pooling of resources.
I'm an optimist, and I'm positive that we're gonna the market demands that. I mean,
Hmm.
more nonprofits are collaborating. I think it was probably more forced, but there were certainly pulling. years ago where like it was harder to do, I'm surrounded by really incredible leaders, not just here locally, but regionally and nationally. And I think that's become the standard is like if you're not working with others, you're not gonna do great work. And so I feel confident that it's become the kind of the standard. And it's easy to kind of get into the mindset of like, oh, we're small, we can't afford it. And like we were small and we couldn't afford it. And there was like I had a lot of kind of immovable objects at the beginning that were discovered to be movable. And so I heard this quote a long time ago. And I wish I could attribute it to someone, but it was like the same hot water that softens a potato will harden an egg. And it's like it just kind of reminds you of like we had it in us the whole time. We just needed to look at it differently. And I look at that as kind of a story of resiliency. Like, I can look at a community and say, it's living in poverty. These kids are facing tough obstacles. And I can feel sorry for those kids. And, it's my story, right? Or I can say, how do we turn this into your superpower? Because if you can overcome these things, just like for me, like my superpower is that I grew up that way, and then I chose to do something about it, and that's become, I think, a driver for, working towards something and having that work ethic. If I can work with young people to use that to their advantage and say, if you can outpace the other person, it doesn't matter what school they went to, it doesn't matter if they came from a different zip code. If you can show an employer that you add more value, if you can show an employer that you're going to run faster and work harder and deliver, the market will reward that. And so I think that's kind of as we look at the nonprofit sector is like if you believe that you're stuck, then you are. If you believe you can get unstuck, then you will. That's kind of how I look at what's happening in our sector right now.
Absolutely. Robert, I really want to thank you for sharing your story and your insights and your expertise. It's very inspiring to hear. I mean, the full circle of you, being a member of the Boys and Girls Club and solving for yourself, a lot of the issues that the communities that you're serving today are facing and bringing you know, your personal expertise as well as the collaboration that you're doing to, solve issues for the communities you're serving. And it's just very inspirational and wonderful. So I want to thank you for your time. And I look forward to seeing the continued impact of the Boys and Girls Club. And I wish you the very best.
Well, first, thank you for inviting me to join you today, and then for the work that you're doing to support the nonprofit sector as well. As I've learned more about your service model, I've been the interim CEO of 5 different nonprofits while never leaving my actual CEO job. And so, as I learned more about the support system that you provide, I was really impressed with the innovation that you brought and how this specifically addresses the pain point of a lot of organizations, especially as they're in that kind of phase of going to excellence. And so the gratitude goes both ways. I'm really grateful for the investment that you're making into the nonprofit community and really working directly with those that I think have great concepts and great leadership. They just are lacking that extra support. And so thank you for inviting me to join you and look forward to doing great things together in the future.
Absolutely. Yes. Please let us do collaborate. And thank you again, Robert.
Great. Thank you so much.